Welcome to the Sharp Angles Betting and DFS Show. My name is Tod Burros, and I am your host. And I am joined again this week by my partner, Ryan McCrystal, and we will go over the Thursday night game, Ryan's props for the rest of the week, and some DFS idea plays I am looking at early in the week for daily fantasy when you consider the ownership that we have at this point and talk a little bit of strategy. But with Friday the 13th coming up this week, I want to make sure you know that we are slashing prices on all of our weekly packages. That's right, no tricks, just treats, as we're giving you 79% off every weekly package site-wide when you use the code SLASH. Why 79 percent off, you ask? That's how accurate Warren's plays on over totals have been in his lifetime, and his strongest play in over a year just hit last week with the Jets-Broncos game hitting the over. We want everyone to jump on board and avoid having your bankrolls be left for dead. Just use the code SLASH to get your 79% off discount. And as Dracula would say, it ends on Friday the 13th. Welcome in my new guest, my partner, Ryan. Ryan, I'm sorry. Doing Dracula just threw me off a little bit.
No worries. Excited to dive in and talk some football with you again this week.
Yes, I'm always excited to dive in and get a bite of a good discount, like 79%. Not my best Dracula, but... For Thursday night, let's just jump into the props. Last week, your Thursday night prop hit. Mine did not. Roshan Johnson was not looking like he was going to catch a pass with them winning. And then, of course, he got concussed. So we'll never know if he could have. But either way, it's an L. I'm now 2-1 for the year. What are you on Thursday nights?
I want to say 5-1 now. We've been pretty good on Thursday nights.
And 14-10 overall is a very good number. Last week wasn't our best, but we're going to hit it this week. Tell us, what is your prop for Thursday night?
Well, before we dive into the props, I did just want to say something about this game.
Oh, I thought you were going to talk about my Dracula.
No. I wanted to talk about this game because it's what I have to say about the Broncos defense sort of leads in to the prop a little bit that I'm going to play. It could be a factor in that prop. And, Broncos Chiefs, 10-point spread, not going to be an interesting game, but I'm actually kind of fascinated by this one because I think it sort of serves as an idiot test for Broncos defensive coordinator Vance Joseph. Obviously, Broncos fans are really frustrated with him this year. He is a big reason why they're off to such a slow start. The defense continues to get gashed week after week. But going up against Patrick Mahomes is an interesting matchup because there's really one rule that everyone in the league has agreed upon when facing Mahomes is that you don't blitz. You can't do it. If you blitz, there's a one-on-one matchup out there somewhere, and he's going to find it. And obviously everybody mixes it up. You can't just do the same thing every time. So you got to blitz occasionally. But for the most part, don't blitz Mahomes. He's going to make you pay for it. Over the course of his career, when you blitz Mahomes...
Especially if you don't do it well like the Broncos.
Exactly, yeah. Over the course of his career, when you blitz Mahomes, you've got a 4% chance of forcing a sack or an interception. Very, very low probability of getting one of these significant plays. And when you blitz, that's really what you're chasing, right? You're hoping to force a mistake. And Mahomes doesn't make those mistakes. He's too good at avoiding the pass rush. He's too good at finding his guy. He doesn't make those types of mistakes against the blitz. And in addition to that, you've got a 12% chance that he has an explosive play of 20 or more yards against you. So if you blitz Mahomes, you are 3 times more likely to force him into a big play than you are to create a big play for yourself. It's just a bad idea. It's why he's blitzed at the lowest rate in the league almost every single year, always near the bottom in terms of the blitz rate that he faces, because you're just better off dropping everybody back in coverage, trying to create pressure. But even if you don't create pressure, at least you've got all your guys back there in coverage to try to cover the receivers as best you can against them. And yet Vance Joseph has not figured this out. In fact, Vance Joseph has gradually blitzed Mahomes more and more every time he faces him. He's last year against Arizona, he faced him, and in 2018 against when he was with Denver as the head coach. Both of those times he faced them he blitzed over 50% of the time. He's the only coach to ever do that to Mahomes. In fact, 3 of the 5 highest blitz rates that Mahomes has faced over the course of his career have all been Vance Joseph. That one time that I mentioned against Arizona last year, and then previously, obviously, they faced each other when they were in the same division the last time he was with Denver as the head coach. And you might be thinking, well, if he continues to blitz, is he seeing some success? Has he figured something out by zigging when everyone else is zagging? The answer is a resounding no. Last year against Arizona, Mahomes against the blitz, 14 of 20 with 5 touchdowns. And yet Joseph just kept bringing the blitz as he was getting absolutely destroyed. So that's why I say this is like an idiot test.
Well, I mean, the more you talk, the more it sounds like he's already taken the idiot test and failed.
You could certainly argue with that because he was in the same division as Mahomes for a while. Last time when he was within Denver, he obviously studied him more extensively than other quarterbacks and thought that he should continue to blitz, and he continued to do that last year. But after he just got absolutely obliterated on those blitzes by Mahomes last year, I feel like someone's got to say to him, look, Vance, you tried it. You tried to be the one guy out there doing something different against Mahomes, and you got torched enough already. Someone has to have said that to him this week in the building. So if he comes out and he still blitzes at this ridiculous rate against Mahomes, he has completely failed the idiot test because he just got destroyed by it last year. There's no excuse for coming out again and having one of these high blitz rates against him. So, I mean, if he does it, the calls for him to be fired in his, before he even gets halfway through the first season, I would say are absolutely justified because he's failed this test.
All right. That was, I won't call it an epic rant because you're so calm. You're not like some of these talk guys who their voice gets animated and Vance Joseph and what's wrong with him? You can't be doing that.
I prefer to back up my rants with statistics rather than hot air.
I love it. So speaking of backing things up, I'm going to back up to the prop for the night. Who do you got?
Yeah, so as I said, this sort of plays into that. And then I'm on the over on Justin Watson's longest reception at 16 and a half yards. The reason it plays into it is, like I said, if you blitz Mahomes a lot, there's going to be a one-on-one matchup out there and he's going to take some shots. If that happens to be Justin Watson a couple times throughout the game, he's going to take advantage of that because he really likes to target Watson downfield. Watson doesn't see a huge target share in the offense. He's only got 16 targets this season, but 11 of those targets are 15 or more yards downfield. So with this prop only out there at 16 and a half yards, basically what we're saying is, does he catch a pass? He's caught a pass at 15 or more yards downfield in 4 of 5 games this year. So we just need one completion, basically. He's going to see targets. If Vance Joseph blitzes a lot, the odds of him getting more targets because he's in more one-on-one situations is obviously increased. So the way I'm looking at this is like we're playing does he catch a pass tonight? and I think that based on how they have tried to get him the ball downfield in every game this year, so I feel pretty good about that happening against a defense that gives up a lot of big plays.
Yeah, and mine is a similar prop for tonight, and I almost looked at it like, really, but they on underdog. Harrison Butker's over-under on extra points was 3 when I looked. In a game where I think that, the Chiefs are likely to score at least 4, maybe 5, 6 touchdowns, and you don't need 2-point conversions if you're winning by 21 points. I like the over on 3 extra points for Harrison Butker. Ryan, your thoughts, because you are way more of a prop guy than me.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I mean, like I said, the potential is there for Vance Joseph to, just come out with a terrible game plan like he did last year against Mahomes. So yeah, the Chiefs could absolutely light up the scoreboard.
Everyone has lit up the scoreboard, and now you're playing the Chiefs.
Yep.
So, all right. So I was going to say, I knew you had the rant about Vance Joseph. So I was going to say, instead of picking a winner, because we're both obviously going to pick the Chiefs tonight, we would do the rant. But you did the rant. So we're going to move on to the rest of your props. And in looking at your list of props, I was more taken by what wasn't there than what is there. And I know you know what I'm talking about. Why don't you explain?
Of course. So you're obviously talking about TJ Hawkinson, who we have discussed every week on this podcast, taking the over on his receptions. I'm off it this week. And, we've lost 2 weeks in a row now giving out that prop. That's actually not the reason why I'm off it, because, 2 weeks ago, we addressed this last week. That was a fluke against Carolina. The Vikings ran their fewest offensive plays in a decade. That's a fluke. That was the reason we lost that prop, and we were willing to jump back on it last week because we just knew that wasn't going to happen again against the Chiefs. Then against the Chiefs last week, he has 5 catches for 8 targets. Anytime Hawkinson gets 8 targets, you're going to assume he's hitting the over on his receptions prop because he's using such a conservative way in the offense. He catches a really high percentage of those targets. In fact, he's got a 77% catch rate on the season. Last week, only 5 of 8 targets. That's a 63% catch rate. So again, I look at that as, if we're going to play this prop all season, he's going to have a stat line like that a couple of times. But if we keep going back to it over the course of a full season, we're going to win most of the time. If he's seeing 8 targets a game, sometimes he's going to catch 5, but more often than not, we're going to hit the over. So we're comfortable with accepting a few of those losses. So that doesn't really scare me based on what happened last week. The reason I'm jumping off the prop right now is Justin Jefferson. Losing Justin Jefferson, I don't think it necessarily helps Hawkinson. You could argue that maybe they force feed him the ball more because they're losing one of their weapons, but they're used in such different ways in the offense. I really don't think that's going to be the case. And one of the things
one opens up space for the other.
Exactly. That was exactly going to be my next point because, like we've talked about throughout the season, Hawkinson really benefits from seeing a lot of too high coverages, and Cousins sees a lot of that. He sees, since the start of last season, he's seen too high coverage over 50% of his dropbacks, and that really opens up the middle of the field for Hawkinson. Maybe teams continue to do that. Maybe Jordan Addison steps into a role and he proves to be a legit deep threat, and defenses continue to do that. But I just don't have enough confidence. The reason they see such a high rate of too high coverage, it definitely could be forced by Jefferson, that teams want to ensure that there's always help over the top for whatever quarterback is lined up against him. So I'm going to stay away from the Hawkinson prop for now. If Jefferson is out for an extended period of time, we'll gather some data over the next couple of weeks and maybe we revisit it. But at this point in time, we need to be in that data collecting stage right now because I just don't have the same confidence as far as how teams are going to approach them.
Fair enough. Let's move on to off of what isn't there to what is there. And you've got 2 running backs, and I'm going to let you hit them together. Bijan on the longest run, 17.5 or under. Actually, I'm going to let you just do the Bijan one for now.
Yeah, I'm on the over on Bijan Robinson's longest rush. It's available at 16.5 yards. It's actually a little bit lower than I would have been willing to take it. So I like it a lot. We played this last week, essentially, with Khalil Herbert on Thursday night going up against the Commanders. We took the over on his longest rush, and even though he got injured, he fortunately, I believe it was still in the first quarter when he hit the over with a nice long run. And it's really all about the Washington defense. They allow 3 or more yards before contact at the highest rate in the league, 36% of running back carries, slightly more than 1 out of every 3 carries. They're leaving a gaping hole at the line of scrimmage. To put that into perspective a little bit more, average is 23%. They're at 36%. So anytime we've got an explosive running back going up against them, this is probably going to be a prop we're going to want to do. And obviously, Bijan Robinson falls into that category as an explosive running back. Now, the one fear you might have, because this is such a run-heavy offense, you could say, like, well, is Washington going to stack the box more to try to plug some of those holes? Could it be easier for them to prevent those gaping holes against a team like this? Probably not, because even with a stacked box, Washington is allowing an average of 2 yards before contact per attempt. So I think this is a really good matchup. And with the Falcons favored in this game, the game script could also increase his usage as a running back. So we could see get a few more carries in this game, just giving him more opportunities to hit this over.
All right. I like it. And then we're going to do these two guys together because they're both under on longest run. Let's do Jacobs, who we had last week, I believe, as well, with an under on the run. And we're going to throw in the man who was found on the road dead, Jerome Ford. Sorry, that's an old Ford joke.
Yeah, we played the Josh Jacobs prop last week and we lost. I'm going back to it though, because I think this was another one of those where we had the right logic. Just, over the course of the season, if you continue to play it, you're going to lose some of them. We're betting that we're going to win this more often than not over a large sample size. It's one that we're going to keep coming back to. He had a 24-yard run last week. It's the reason we lost, but it was the first time he had a run over 10 yards. Only the second time he's reached 10 yards or longer. So it was the first time he hit the over on his longest rush prop this season. But if you dive into the numbers for this game, the Raiders offensive line struggled just as much as we thought they would, maybe even a little more so. He was contacted at or behind the line of scrimmage on 45% of his carries, the second highest rate of the season. And he only had 3 carries with that key number, 3 or more yards before contact. Obviously, one of those produced that long 24-yard run. So, even though we lost last week, this is the type of production from the offensive line where more often than not, we're going to win this. So I'm going to stick with it based on the fact that the offensive line lived up to our expectations, even though, unfortunately, we lost the bet. Just to hit some of the numbers again that we mentioned last week real quickly, he's averaging 0.8 yards before contact per attempt. So this has been a recurring problem. And he also has a tough matchup this week against the Patriots. They're allowing 3 or more yards before contact. Only 9% of running back carries, the lowest rate in the league. So terrible offensive line against a run defense that has been pretty stout this year. So a really good matchup. I said that I would take this even lower, but the line is actually out there at 13.5 yards. Dropped a little bit from last week. I believe the number last week was 15.5. So it's dropped a little bit, but I'm still very much willing to take it. He's only cleared, like I said, last week was the only time he's cleared that number. So I'm feeling pretty good about this. The other under longest rush prop you mentioned that we're going to take is Jerome Ford. We've talked about Ford a couple of weeks ago, I think it was. We played the yardage in that game. I'm using similar logic here, but I think I prefer the longest rush under against the 49ers. Ford has been contacted at or behind the line of scrimmage on 66% of his carries. That's horrific. And because we've seen Nick Chubb behind this line come nowhere close to that, typically, he invites some contact behind the line of scrimmage because he's typically a between the tackles type of runner. You're going to run into more contact when you do that. But Chubb is nowhere near the bottom of the league in this stat. They've had some injuries, obviously losing Conklin at right tackle. That's somewhat of a factor, but to be the worst rate in the league, this is mostly falling on Ford. He doesn't have the vision to avoid contact. He dances in the backfield too much. I think we mentioned that last time I played this prop, this was a big concern of him when he entered the league out of Cincinnati, that he was going to invite this early contact. And he's just he doesn't have the extreme explosive ability to really make up for it. And he's going up against a good 49ers defense this week. They contact opposing running backs at or behind the line of scrimmage on 63% of carries, second highest rate in the league. So one of the best defenses at forcing early contact, literally the worst running back, and inviting early contact, terrible matchup. Not only is he going to struggle to have a long run against this type of defense, but if he continues to perform at this level, I think he's just going to lose carries. Stefanski's going to get frustrated with this at some point. And then the other factor here is PJ Walker might be starting this game for Deshaun Watson. If that happens, obviously this game has blowout potential, potentially a really bad game script for running the ball, which cuts into his carries. So I would expect him to not see a ton of touches in this game and have basically no room to run when he does. So I'm on the under. This line has not been posted yet. There's not a lot of lines available for this game because of the Watson injury, I would assume. But if it's available at 11.5 or higher, I'll be on the under.
Yeah, talking about idiot tests, Pierce Strong has looked good every time they've handed him the ball. He looks better than Jerome Ford. He looked better than Zeke Elliott in New England. I know I am, begging because of my best ball portfolio, but I just think Pierce Strong is a better running back. And how long does it take you to realize, what might be obvious? So let's go with the next one. And that was my rant of the night. My Theo Strong should play. Would you agree, by the way?
I mean, I'm not super high on Strong, but I would agree because Ford has been so bad. Yeah, you've got to give the other guys in the backfield an opportunity when he's struggling this much.
All right. So one of Matt Harmon's favorite players of in the last couple of years, a guy whose peripherals had really, really looked a lot better, and he seems to have a great connection with his quarterback. Talk to me about your next prop and the over on Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah, sticking with that Browns 49ers game, obviously. I'll be on the over. Haven't seen this line posted yet. I'll take it at 4.5 or lower. It's been available at 3.5 at certain points this season already. So I'm hoping for that just because, like we said, especially if Watson doesn't play, this could be a blowout. So the game script could be working against us. I'm hoping it's a little bit lower, but I'll still take it because I think the way that Ayuk is used in the 49ers offense matches up really well with how the Browns play defense. They use man coverage at the highest rate, 39%. And so, anytime we have one of these outlier defenses in terms of coverage, I like to look at how the other team, how their target share shifts against those types of teams. In this case, it's a pretty big difference for Ayuk. I was looking at over the past 2 seasons when he, Debo, and Kittle are all on the field together. Obviously, that group has had some injuries over the past season. So only looking at when they're on the field together, Ayuk's target share versus man coverage sits at 32%, team high. Zone coverage, 23%. Pretty big gap there. So against a team like the Browns that's going to try to use man coverage at a pretty high rate, we should see an elevated usage rate for him in this game. And a lot of teams, they don't play a lot of man coverage. So we're looking at sort of a small sample size here, but the 49ers have played 3 games in which Ayuk has been healthy over the last 2 seasons, where they have faced a man coverage rate of 35% or higher. In those games, Ayuk has seen targets of 8, 9, and 11. So it has played out in these games where they've had an elevated rate. It has led to more targets for him. So the Browns pretty consistently playing at that 35% rate or higher should lead to a big workload for Ayuk in this matchup.
When life is getting you downs, you bet the over on Josh Downs, one of my late best ball heavy ownership. I called him coming out discount Zay Flowers. I felt that they had a lot of similarities between them. And honestly, I kind of like Downs a little bit more. I struggle to see the difference other than the draft capital, obviously. But you seem to be on the Josh Downs over receptions this week with the Gardner Minshew as quarterback.
Yeah, I think he potentially benefits from Minshew taking over. Obviously, we've seen both quarterbacks play, Minshew and Anthony Richardson. We've seen a little bit of both of them this year. Obviously, a really small sample size. But Downs does have a 25% target share from Minshew and a 16% from Richardson. Now, like I said, small sample size. So how much should we trust that? I try to think of it when dealing with the small sample sizes. Why is it happening? Can we come up with a good reason for it? And if we can, then I think we can trust it. In this case, I think the reason is basically that Minshew gets rid of the ball more quickly. He needs to because he doesn't have Richardson's scrambling ability. Obviously, anytime all of these quarterbacks like Richardson that have that type of running ability, they're going to tend to hold the ball more. They're going to hold the ball longer because when they see pressure, they don't necessarily feel the need to get rid of it right away. They can just scramble, buy some time. Whereas Minshew, he's the type of quarterback, although he's not a terrible athlete, he tends to get rid of the ball quickly to avoid pressure. So, we can see this in the numbers just this season. 64% of Minshew's attempts have been released in 2.5 seconds or less, only 55% for Richardson. Now Downs, because he lines up in the slot, because he's one of these smaller, quicker receivers, he plays a big role in the quick passing game. It's easier to get him the ball quickly than it is Michael Pittman often. If he's lined up on the outside, he tends to be running more routes downfield. So Downs plays a much bigger role in the quick passing game, which is a bigger part of Minshew's game. So he's going to benefit from this. This prop is available at 3.5, which I think is a really good number. I would have maybe been tempted to consider it if it climbed higher than that, which it could if he has another big game with Minshew. But at least for this week, we've got it available, I think, at a really good number at 3.5. So I'll be on that for sure.
Awesome. And we're going to finish up with A team that I've always considered my team, a team that I really fell out of love with during the Dave Gettleman years. And now, I was not happy with the Evan Neal pick. I thought that, a team that needed so many assets, taking a right tackle at, 7, and it turns out they took him over Charles Cross. The guy they took in the same draft is going to be playing with most likely Tyrod Taylor this week. And you probably wisely have the under longest receptions of 14.5 on one Wan'Dale Robinson.
Yeah, this is for the Sunday night game. Obviously, we don't have a lot of props available for this game yet. So I'm going to say that I'm willing to take it under at 14 or higher, but this might serve as an idiot test for all of us because it was available at 17 and a half last week. And if it's available that number, you must be on this prop. It's a gimme. I have no idea why it was available at that number last week. Robinson has one catch in his career over that number. So why the prop was available at 17 and a half, I have absolutely no idea. Hopefully we get it again. I kind of doubt we will because that is so ridiculous. It almost feels like a typo. But these props don't change a lot. These longest reception, longest rush props, one of the reasons why I've been on them a lot this year is they don't change a lot. So when we feel like we're onto something, if we have good logic, we can probably play it for a few weeks. It's going to take a while to adjust. So I'm hoping, maybe it drops to 16 or 15. Even if it drops all the way to 14, I'm still on it, but I'm pretty confident it's going to be available at one of those higher numbers just because they don't change a lot. To dive a little bit deeper, the reason why he doesn't have these long receptions is, remember, he's a former running back in college. He was playing running back when he was at Nebraska, played a little bit more of a hybrid role than at Kentucky at the end of his career. And even though he's playing receiver now in the NFL, he's basically being used in a way that you would use a running back who you have shifted out into the slot. Like he's basically a running back lining up at receiver, except he's doing it full time, just about. Only 6% of his targets have been at 10 or more yards downfield, and his average depth of target is 3 yards downfield. So even for him to just clear 10 yards, he's going to have to make somebody miss. And so to get a longer run, to get a longer play, to get it all the way up to 18 yards to hit the over, which is what he would have needed last week, he's going to have to make a bunch of guys miss, essentially, which he's capable of. I like Robinson a lot. I think, and I like the way that they're using him. It's the perfect way to use a weapon like Robinson, but he's not an explosive player in this role. He's not going to produce these huge explosive plays in the passing game. He's the guy who's filling the pass when the passing game is serving as an extension of your run game. Robinson's the perfect guy to use, and that's how they're using him. He's just not going to have these huge chunk plays down the field. So, like I said, if it's available at 17 and a half, that's an idiot test for all of us. We need to be on the under if we get that, but I'll be on the under almost regardless because it's unlikely to fall dramatically. So as long as we get 14 and a half or higher, I like this prop a lot.
Awesome. Great group of stuff. We do have one question in the chat before we move on. Garner Hassler, thoughts on Pollard to have a bounce back week against the Chargers? Lack of production recently, largely due to game script, both fantasy and over 67.5 rushing yards. I mean, over the last few years, Ryan, the Chargers rush defense has kind of been a cheat code for health and welfare. Your thoughts on Garner's question?
I would say, as far as I'm always going to lean over as far as his rushing yards prop this year, just because we know that the volume always has the potential to be there as long as the game script goes their way. He's the true workhorse in that backfield. And so in a game, they're favored by 2 points right now. It's certainly reasonable to think we're going to get a good game script. So I'm certainly going to lean that way. And from a fantasy perspective, this game is pretty high total, 51. That's got to be one of maybe even the highest of the week because we're seeing such low totals around the league. Certainly reasonable to make him a priority in fantasy, I would think. What's your take on that from a fantasy perspective?
I mean, I like it because of the Chargers, right? They've been a team you can run on. McCarthy is under a lot of pressure. He believes in running the ball. The problem is that Tony Pollard hasn't looked like the same guy this year. And it's always easy to forget when guys come back from injury that there is a slight chance that their first year back, they're not as explosive as they were prior to the injury. He did have it's normally an injury that you don't think of as one that lingers. But, in looking at him, I don't see the same guy yet. So, I mean, I'm not the biggest prop guy out there. 67.5 rushing yards, it's not a bargain. So if I was gonna, gun to my head, I would take the over. But I don't know, Ryan, if it's something that I would bet on personally.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing we should acknowledge too is that his efficiency numbers were absolutely benefiting from sharing the workload with Elliott the past few years. I mean, I think one of these explosive runners who's not being asked to carry the full load is benefiting from that because they're putting him into the game when they know he's fresh and they're trying to create a chunk play. Now he's being used in a completely different way where they're trying to get explosive plays, but they're also just relying on him just to, keep the chains moving. They want him to play both roles now. So that's going to make him a little bit less explosive. But, I'm still, because of the volume that he's likely to see week after week when the game script goes their way. Obviously, it wasn't there last week when they're getting blown out, but I don't think they're going to get blown out against the Chargers this week. And, if they're winning the game in the second half, he's going to go back to, earlier in the year where he had 23 carries against the Cardinals, 25 carries against the Jets.
Yeah, if he gets that, he'll 67. Yeah, I agree that if I was going to bet it, I would bet the over. Let's move on. What's next, Ryan?
Well, let's jump into the DFS talk now. I'll start with quarterbacks. What do you got?
All right. So, because it's so early in the week, my thoughts are not always set. And I've mentioned that before. But I do want to teach a little bit of DFS strategy and thoughts each week. So something to keep in mind with lower owned players at any position. Consider if you are going to play them, you want to either be 2x or 3x what the field is. You want leverage, right? And, if you're making 100 lineups and somebody's 5%, and you put in 7 lineups, you've kind of limped, right? Where I tend to limp is with high-owned players. So if a guy is 15% owned, maybe I'll go 11 or 10 or 12 if I don't really believe in him. The reason that he's got a high ownership is because he's a good play, almost always, right? So taking a slight under position or a slight over position with a high-owned guy makes sense. With that in mind, Gardner Minshew at 5K is 6% ownership. So would I put 12% on Gardner Minshew? Yes, I would. Would I go a little higher than that? Maybe. If you start seeing Gardner Minshew at 8-9%, that's going to be a fade for me. It's not a great offense. And I don't want that much of my portfolio tied up in a guy that is, he's a journeyman quarterback. He's a good journeyman quarterback, but he's a journeyman quarterback. But if Gardner Minshew stays at 5-6% ownership, I do think there's a very good chance that I'll be over. Now, other part of the strategy, who is the highest owned guy when I looked this morning? It was Matt Stafford. Right now, he is the highest owned guy. And with the recency bias of Burrow Chase in mind, I find it hard to take a non-running quarterback that's also the highest owned guy in an over position in DFS. So I will get to more about this Rams situation when we get to the wide receivers and how I will play it. But I am not playing into 15% ownership on Matt Stafford. So back to Joe Burrow. He looked much healthier last week, and he says he feels even better. Jamar Chase is going to be very chalky this week. Right now, Burrow's ownership is at 6% at a salary of $6,300 which is at 6,300 because he has been injured. It hasn't bounced back yet. So if he is healthy and he stays in that 6-7% range, I am going to be well over on Joe Burrow. I almost played him last week and I kicked myself. I always get Joe Burrow wrong. He's just, there's always that guy who you always get wrong. For me, it's Joe Burrow. But if he's at 6,300, he makes Jamar Chase even a better value. And similar to kind of the Kelsey, and even if T. Higgins is back, I think T. Higgins coming back off an injury has been a nightmare for fantasy players a number of times. So, and then the last guy I'll throw out thoughts on is Brock Purdy. He's playing a tough Cleveland D, but at 5,600, he hasn't missed yet. And I know he's not a running quarterback, but I showed him at 1% ownership. And if he's at 1% ownership, you better believe with those weapons, I'm going to be at least 5-6% Brock Purdy, Ryan.
Yeah, I can see your logic with the low roster share with Purdy. That makes me nervous, though, because that feels like a game, especially if Watson doesn't go, that could be like a 17-6 49ers win.
And that, that wasn't taken into account when I put my list together. But even still, there's not a lot of great values out there this week. So that was, yes, but the great thing about that is, again, back to my earlier point on low ownership guys and being able to go 4 or 5x, to have 5% of your portfolio on a guy like Purdy, the upside is so high if you get the unlikely scenario where it's not a 17-6 game.
Yeah.
But I completely hear your point.
Yeah. The other quarterback you mentioned that I wanted to throw my 2 cents on is Burrow. We talked about him a little bit last week, and I was saying how, I was fading him. I was on the under on his longest completion.
Right. Remember, I mentioned it and then I didn't play him.
Yeah. You were leaning towards being on him last week. I remember. And I lost that prop because, as you mentioned, he looked a little bit healthier. Things seem to be trending in the right direction. I'm not betting against him now. I'm sort of in the wait and see phase because that was a terrible defense that they beat last week in Arizona. And even still, on throws 15 or more yards on field, he was only 1 of 4. He's now 3 of 26 on the year. That's 11.5%. There's even though he looked a little bit better overall, he seemed to look healthier. It didn't help them throw the ball downfield at all. That was, the receivers made some explosive plays for them after the catch. Burrow wasn't doing much on the deep ball at all. And so, I don't know. One of the reasons why I'm not going back to that prop is, the Seahawks are also a pretty bad defense. So, they could certainly, especially if he's a little bit healthier than last week, maybe he does break out. So that's probably coming soon. So I'm not going to bet against him at this point, but I am a little, I just wanted to mention that I am a little hesitant. I'm not buying the idea that he's fully back until we actually see them start to have some sort of downfield passing game.
Yeah. Yep.
So let's move on to the running backs now. And I think you want to mention a guy who we have both been pretty high on throughout the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Hold on one second. One of my co-owners wants to know who I want to start in the draft. I have to answer him with the time getting short.
Sure. The guy, of course, that I'm referencing is David Montgomery, who I've played some props on him, and I know that you've been on him in DFS as well throughout the year.
Heavy best ball position. David Montgomery is still the best value on the board this week. And for some reason, perhaps if Tampa, his ownership isn't that high, even though he's showing as the best value. Even if his ownership gets up a little bit more than where it was, I think that David Montgomery, his coach came out today and said, look, we're going to feed this guy the ball. His O-line can be successful against any team. The only negative is he is on the road, and I do think the Lions are a much different team at home. But right now, with single-digit ownership, I will definitely be at least 20% on Montgomery. If he gets into the 20s, then I'll see what the optimizer has done. Now, right now, and this makes no sense to me. Maybe you can explain it with, the defense is better than I do. Joe Mixon showing 27% ownership. He's been one of the least efficient running backs of the year. And you've got Chase as one of the highest owned wide receivers, and Mixon is one of the most highest owned running backs. I found that it's rare for them both to go off at the same time. I will be off Mixon at that ownership big time. I'm also off Travis Etienne at 19% ownership at 7,100 salary. He has looked really not great most of the year, and he had this huge week when everyone was watching him last week. And the Bills had a lot of injuries on defense, so I'm going to be pretty wary there. There's a couple injury situations at running back that's going to really determine a lot this week. If Roschon Johnson can clear concussion protocol, he's at 4,600. We rarely get to play cheap running backs on DraftKings anymore, and that always was kind of a cheat code. So I've got Dante Foreman also at 4,400. I think if Roschon is cleared, you can play both. You might want to play Roschon in double the lineups of Foreman, but I think either one of them could do well. Now, I think the field is going to think the Vikings are a bad run defense because the Eagles gashed them early in the season, but the last few weeks they've been a lot tougher. So a lot more. I'm going to have to do a lot more looking into this whole thing. But in general, I mean, there is a chance that I'll be at 50, 60% ownership on one of these Chicago running backs because doing so and doubling the field if they're 20% owned, if they hit it at a low price, it gives you a lot more chances to get the rest of the lineup right with studs. Jeff Wilson is 4,300. I'm leaning against him. I mean, there's other running backs there. I like Mostert at I think it's 6,300. And I think his ownership is going to be muted. And the other one is possibly Chuba Hubbard, another one of my late best ball guys that I have 20% on, who is cheap, and it looks like Miles Sanders might miss. So a lot of cheap running backs. I would say, guys, do your homework, look into it, pick the ones that you want, because it's really rare to get that old-fashioned cheap running back anymore. And lastly, Christian McCaffrey has a tough matchup and a $9,500 salary, but his ownership right now is showing 5%. And, Christian McCaffrey at 5% is an automatic over for me. I don't care the salary. I don't care who he's playing, because he's that guy who can put up 40 points in any given week. Your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, well, going back to Mixon, I agree with you. I'm surprised that he would be such a popular play this week. I wonder if maybe some of that is sort of a combination of fading the Seahawks, who have a good record but have beat up on two really bad teams in the Panthers and Giants the past 2 weeks, sort of pad the record, and then also buying into the Bengals being better. That, because Burrow is getting healthier, maybe that's some people thinking that these are two teams potentially headed in different directions right now, and that could lead to just a good game script for the Bengals to run the ball more, which they haven't really had much this year. Maybe that's part of it, but like I said, I'm not 100% in on Burrow being fully back, so I would certainly wouldn't. If that's the reason, I'm not chasing that line of thought. As for the Roschon Johnson, Dante Foreman one, man, that feels like a trap to me. I completely understand that you want to have exposure to a low salary starting running back, right? Because he doesn't even need to have a good game, but just the game script could, the game could play out in such a way where he doesn't have a great stat line, but he scores 2 touchdowns because they happen to be down near the goal line twice and he gets those carries. So you want to have some
Well, and
exposure. But
Roshan, as we know, can also catch passes.
maybe.
I'm a lot more likely. I'm a big Roshan guy. I liked him coming out.
Like
I'm a
I
lot more likely to be over on Roshan than Donta Foreman. But what I like is the fact that if we do get all four guys, it gives you a chance to be over on all four. Because again, the way DFS works is you're looking for a half of 1% outcome in most of these tournaments, and you're gonna have to take some chances. But again, I get it, and I'm hoping those kinds of things mute ownership, because that's the key to get it, to going over.
Yeah, I mean, like I said last week, the idea that Roshan Johnson is a pass catching back, I think that's just all because for
You don't like
somehow
that.
I don't know what happened in week 1 that led to him. I think it was 6 receptions, or maybe it was 5 catches on 6
It
targets or
was
something.
garbage time.
Yeah, it just
It was pure garbage time.
he's not that type of player. I mean, the reason why he was so good in college was he paired so perfectly with Bijan Robinson. Roshan Johnson is the downhill between the tackles bulldozer, and Robinson, although he can certainly do that also, so explosive on the edges and in the passing game. Johnson had 14 catches all of last season. So for him to come out with whatever it was, 5 or 6 catches in week 1 was just weird. I think when we look back at his entire career, that's still good. That could very easily end up being his career high, because that's just not the type of player that he is. You don't, even when you are throwing the ball to him, the play is not really designed to get chunk yardage by giving Roshan Johnson the ball. He's a check down guy. You dump it off to him because he's on the field. He's a good pass protector, so he's on the field sometimes in those situations. So, he might catch some passes sometimes, but you're not trying to get him the ball ever. And so that's why it just feels like a trap to me, because I think they're going to, I don't think either one of them is going to dominate carries or dominate touches in any way. And so it feels like it could be just, both of them have, 8 carries for 25 yards or something like that. But like I said, with a low salary, certainly worth chasing. So, let's move on to the wide receivers. What do you got for us there?
Well, I love, you've given me a lot to think about, and that's why I love bringing up early things and bouncing them off you. So, because, I don't have the time to dig deep until late in the week. So I love those thoughts. I thank you for them. As mentioned, Jamar Chase right now is by far the best value on the whole slate, and will have the ownership to match it. My thoughts are 8,300 is still too cheap for a guy who's being peppered like he is. Now, T. Higgins returning, I know I said it wouldn't stop me, but again, I have to feel confident. I'm not going to fade him much if I fade him. There's a very good chance a guy like that at a good salary like that, maybe I will be even weight, and then in the optimizer trying to come up with a couple rules that will put a different kind of build together to get him. But my favorite plays right now on the whole slate, based on the ownership I saw, is Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Both have single-digit ownerships when I was looking, and you've got Stafford as the highest owned quarterback. So the fact that there's 2 of them is obviously muting the ownership of both. And so to me, the obvious way to play this, if the ownerships continue, is to fade Stafford heavily and then make a rule at least one of Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua in every lineup, and run that for maybe 3/4 of your lineups, and then make 25% of your teams without that rule. And that way, you get, because both Kupp and Nacua could break the slate, right, Ryan? And so,
Absolutely.
by putting one of them in the lineup, if Stafford's in 15% and these guys each end up with 5-10% ownership, it means that almost every time they're in a lineup, it's with Matt Stafford. So making a rule without him is something that I am very interested in right now. A couple other interesting things I saw at wide receiver. Both the Bucks wide receivers are very low owned right now. Might not be the best matchup, but I mean, again, anytime I can get really talented players, at 5% or less ownership, that's something I tend to want to be at least 2 to 3 times over on. Speaking of that, I went heavy on Devontae Smith last week and I whiffed. And the Jets definitely are a tough matchup. But Devonta Smith is at 1% ownership right now. And that 30 to 40 point game is going to come. I don't want to guess when it's going to come. But if I can put 12, 13% on Devonta Smith against 1% ownership, I am going to do that just from a mathematical standpoint every single time, because there's very few players who we've seen break a slate in the NFL, and Devonta Smith has done that multiple times. Last name I'll throw out there is Tyler Lockett. And that could be a trap. I love Tyler Lockett. Right now it's showing low ownership, but I think Lockett's ownership is going to rise because they're going to correlate. People are going to correlate him with Jamar Chase. So I think his ownership might rise more than people think in a vacuum. I like Tyler Lockett, one of my favorite players, but I don't think I'll be on him this week, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the Chase one that you mentioned, I like that as well. I mentioned how, I'm not fully buying Burrow because they're not throwing downfield that well. Well, as Chase showed last week, he doesn't necessarily need that to have a great game. Higgins is the one that sees more downfield targets than him. That's really Higgins' role. And Chase, obviously he can do everything, but he does get used on the underneath stuff more often. And so I wonder if Higgins returns, if that even helps you if you want to target Chase, because maybe that drives the Chase roster share down a little bit. But we have some reason to think, because their downfield passing game is struggling, that Higgins probably isn't a great play this week. Burrow's still sort of figuring, getting more comfortable throwing the deep ball, and Chase can survive without that and still be productive. So that might actually help you out in that case if Higgins plays.
Awesome. All right. The last thing is tight end. I'm just going to give a couple quick thoughts on that, Ryan. I'm seeing real heavy ownership on Ertz and Ingram in the early 20s. I mean, I'm sorry. I can't play either of those guys at that kind of ownership. Ingram is, he's really come along since he's been on the Jags, but it's definitely been on a big week followed by two average or small weeks. I'm not going to play into that kind of ownership. Zach Ertz, I don't think, has the kind of ceiling that you want to play into that kind of ownership. The problem is there's not a lot of guys I really do like. One name I'll throw out there is Cole Kmet at 4,600. Justin Fields seems to be back to being the Justin Fields that can actually throw the ball, and that they're putting him in positions to be successful, which I think I talked about last week, how they weren't putting him in positions to be successful. I think both Kmet and DJ Moore are interesting plays this week at lower ownership. TJ Hawkinson is showing at a very bad value this week. He's 6,600. That's another one where if we start flirting with 5% or less for Hawkinson, I'll take the chance with Justin Jefferson being gone and go to 10 to 12% on him. But if he's 8, 9%, I don't want 16, 17% Hawkinson at a high salary. Low price guy I'll throw out, and I know I just keep mentioning this team, and they're not a great offense, but Cade Otton at like $3,100, he's not that bad. And he's on the field all the time. And what you need a tight end, especially when there's not a lot of great tight end options. I think people are going to play a lot of Pitts this week since he finally got targets last week. So I'm going to throw out Cade Otton as my last guy. Ryan, any last thoughts on the tight ends?
Yeah, I'm with you with Otton. I mean, with those low salaried tight ends, what you need is a couple catches and a touchdown, right? And then you've got good value. And with Otton playing against the Lions, I think every Lions game has shootout potential because they've got some questions on defense and they've got a really good offense. And so, yeah, for him to have 3 catches and a touchdown and get you decent value there, that's certainly plausible in this type of a matchup. The other one you mentioned that I think is interesting is Cole Kmet. I was doing a little bit of research on his usage. because they're going up against the Vikings. Their defensive coordinator, Brian Flores, loves to blitz. 55% blitz rate this year, easily the highest. So I was sort of looking into the Bears offense and how have they adjusted to blitzes. And I don't have an answer to fully explain this, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Dating back to the start of last season, 8 of Kmet's 10 touchdowns have come against the blitz. Now, without diving in and like looking at their play calls and seeing exactly how it's happening, I can't fully explain it. But that's a really high percentage for him to be scoring off the blitz at that kind of rate. It's interesting. I like I said, I don't know that I have an answer for why that's happening, but that's a lot of touchdowns to be scoring against the blitz, and against a team where that is going to blitz at a really high rate and has maybe the potential to be a higher scoring game. I think that just sort of could add to your confidence in playing Kmet.
I love it. I mean, you gave me 2 reasons to back off guys earlier. Now you've given me a little fuel for my fire. And again, that is really good. And the kind of, I like the way I like to teach, no matter what I'm teaching, Ryan, is I like to teach theory, and I like to teach how you move through different thoughts and listen to other things to get to your final result. So good stuff. I also want to mention to our Friday the 13th friends, remember that we're slashing prices on all of our weekly packages this week. No tricks, just treats. 79% off weekly packages site-wide when you use the code /. Yep, Warren, 79% on his overs, and he just hit his biggest one ever. Get in there with a package before Friday the 13th, because everything ends on Friday the 13th. All right, that's going to do it for this week. Ryan, thank you as always, and we will see you next week.